What does it take to dismantle centuries of injustice? For one man, it began with a vision of equality and a fight against the odds. Today, we dive into the extraordinary life of Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American Supreme Court justice, who not only reshaped the American legal system, but also changed the trajectory of civil rights in this country. We'll uncover his journey from a segregated upbringing in Baltimore to his groundbreaking victories in the courtroom, the context of the civil rights era that framed his fight, and the legacy of justice he left behind. So, grab a cup of coffee and let's get into it. Be sure to stick around until the end to discover how you can help keep Thurgood's legacy alive. Born in 1908, Thurgood Marshall entered the world during a turbulent time in American history. The Reconstruction era, which had promised African Americans newfound freedoms and rights following the Civil War, had ended just a few decades earlier. The hopeful strides of Reconstruction, anchored by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, were systematically undone by the rise of Jim Crow laws. These laws entrenched racial segregation across the South and in parts of the North, dictating every aspect of African Americans' lives, from where they could live and work to the schools they could attend and the public facilities they could use. These policies sought to maintain a social order that upheld white supremacy, relegating African Americans to second-class citizenship. The era was marked by violence and terror aimed at enforcing this social hierarchy. Lynching was a common occurrence, and racial massacres, like those in Wilmington, North Carolina, in 1898 or Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 1921, destroyed thriving Black communities and left lasting scars. Organizations like the Ku Klux Klan operated with impunity, while local and federal governments often turned a blind eye to their atrocities. African Americans living under Jim Crow knew that the system's reach was not limited to the South. Northern cities like Baltimore, where Marshall grew up, had their own forms of de facto segregation. Discrimination in housing, employment, and education reinforced racial inequities, even without the explicit legal codification found in the South. Amidst this grim backdrop, African American communities displayed remarkable resilience. Black families emphasized the importance of education, seeing it as a pathway to progress. Institutions like Howard University and Lincoln University emerged as beacons of learning and centers for activism, nurturing a new generation of leaders committed to challenging systemic racism. Black churches, businesses, and social organizations became critical spaces for support and resistance. The NAACP, founded in 1909, was a direct response to this era of oppression, providing a legal and organizational framework to fight against segregation and disenfranchisement. This was the world that shaped Thurgood Marshall. Born to a middle-class family in Baltimore, he witnessed firsthand the injustices of segregation, but also the strength of his community's determination to rise above them. His parents instilled in him a deep respect for education and the power of debate, values that would serve as the foundation for his future career. At the dinner table, arguments and discussions were a nightly tradition, sharpening Marshall's wit and fostering his passion for justice. Against the odds, this environment set the stage for a man who would one day take on the system of oppression he was born into and leave an indelible mark on American history. Marshall's upbringing in Baltimore, Maryland, was profoundly shaped by its dual realities. While the city was deeply segregated, it also fostered a thriving Black middle class that offered some opportunities for stability and upward mobility. Baltimore's African American community had a strong network of churches, schools, and businesses that cultivated resilience and pride in the face of systemic discrimination. Despite the limitations imposed by segregation, these institutions provided a foundation for nurturing young talents like Thurgood Marshall. His parents played a central role in shaping his character and intellect. William Marshall, Thurgood's father, worked as a steward at an exclusive club for white members. Though his job placed him within the confines of a segregated environment, William observed the power dynamics at play and often shared these insights with his family. He also valued critical thinking and debate, frequently engaging Thurgood in discussions about politics, justice, and current events. These nightly debates at the family dinner table were not mere conversations. They were intellectual sparring matches that encouraged Thurgood to defend his ideas, question assumptions, and refine his reasoning skills. Norma Marshall, his mother, was a teacher who championed the importance of education. She served as a role model of discipline and determination, ensuring that her children understood the value of learning as a pathway to empowerment. Norma's emphasis on education was particularly significant given the barriers Black students faced in Baltimore, where schools were segregated and often underfunded. Despite these challenges, she worked to create an environment that celebrated academic achievement and intellectual curiosity. Together, Thurgood's parents instilled in him a belief in the transformative power of knowledge and the necessity of standing up for one's principles. Their values of resilience, critical thinking, and education laid the foundation for Marshall's future career as a lawyer and civil rights advocate. The lively debates in the Marshall household not only sharpened Thurgood's mind, but also ignited a passion for justice that would guide him throughout his life. Thurgood Marshall's father, William, played a pivotal role in nurturing his son's fascination with the law and justice. William believed deeply in the importance of understanding how systems worked, particularly the legal system, and he made a point of exposing Thurgood to courtroom proceedings from a young age. He often took his son to the courthouse to watch trials, introducing him to the world of argumentation, evidence, and the power of persuasion. These visits were not just father-son outings. They were lessons in understanding justice and its shortcomings. At the courthouse, young Thurgood observed attorneys presenting their cases, juries deliberating, and judges rendering decisions. He was struck by the way lawyers used logic, evidence, and language to advocate for their clients. Even in an era when the legal system was often stacked against African Americans, the courtroom represented a place where ideas and arguments held sway. For Marshall, this exposure sparked a lifelong interest in the law as a tool for addressing injustice and inequality. William Marshall also encouraged critical thinking at home. He believed that rigorous discussion was a key part of education, and he would often engage Thurgood in debates about current events, history, and the principles of fairness and justice. These conversations helped Marshall develop the confidence and intellectual dexterity that would later define his career. William's insistence on discipline and determination complemented these lessons, teaching Thurgood that success required both hard work and strategic thinking. The combination of these experiences, observing the drama and logic of the courtroom and engaging in spirited debates at home, helped Marshall see the law not just as a set of rules, but as a dynamic force that could be wielded to create change. These early lessons laid the groundwork for his future as a lawyer who would use his skills to challenge the systemic barriers of segregation and discrimination. It was in these moments that the seeds of Marshall's vision for justice and equality began to take root. Thurgood Marshall's early education was emblematic of the systemic inequities African American students faced under segregation. While Black schools were deemed separate but equal under the law, in practice, they were anything but. Facilities were often underfunded, classrooms overcrowded, and teachers overburdened. Resources such as textbooks, science equipment, and even basic supplies were scarce or outdated compared to those provided to white schools. Despite these challenges, Black educators, like those at Marshall School, often went above and beyond to provide a solid education and inspire their students to aim high. Marshall's personality and intellect stood out during his school years. Known for his sharp mind and sense of humor, he had a rebellious streak that sometimes got him into trouble. This was most evident when he was suspended from high school for playing a prank on one of his teachers. While some might see this as a setback, Marshall turned his suspension into an opportunity. During his time away from school, he chose to memorize the U.S. Constitution, a document that outlined the very ideals of equality and justice that segregation blatantly contradicted. This act of studying the Constitution was more than a disciplinary exercise. It became a foundational moment in Marshall's life. He came to understand the power and potential of the law to bring about change, even in a system rigged against African Americans. The Constitution, with its promises of equal protection and due process, would become a central tool in his future legal battles against segregation and discrimination. Marshall's ability to turn an obstacle into an opportunity was a testament to his resilience and determination. Even in a segregated school system that sought to limit his potential, he managed to find ways to challenge himself and expand his horizons. This combination of intellect, resourcefulness, and an emerging sense of justice would later define his approach as a lawyer and civil rights advocate, where he used the very principles enshrined in the Constitution to dismantle the legal foundations of segregation. Thurgood Marshall's time at Lincoln University marked a turning point in his life, shaping his intellectual and social development. Founded in 1854, Lincoln University in Pennsylvania was one of the nation's first historically black colleges and had a reputation for fostering excellence among African American students. When Marshall arrived, however, he initially found himself more interested in socializing than studying. Known for his charisma and humor, he was a popular figure on campus, but his academic performance left much to be desired in his early years. Things began to shift for Marshall when he discovered the debate team. Participating in debates allowed him to channel his sharp wit and natural gift for argumentation into something constructive. Through this activity, he not only honed his public speaking skills, but also developed a passion for advocacy and critical thinking. At the same time, Marshall became involved in campus activism, inspired by the political and social issues facing African Americans in the 1930s. Lincoln University was a hotbed for emerging black leaders, and Marshall's peers included future influential figures like poet Langston Hughes and Ghanaian independence leader Kwame Nkrumah, who further broadened his perspectives. Marshall's journey took a profound turn when he decided to pursue a career in law. After graduating from Lincoln University, he applied to the University of Maryland Law School, only to be denied admission solely because of his race. This rejection was not just a personal disappointment. It was a stark reminder of the entrenched racial barriers that African Americans faced in every facet of life. Determined not to let this setback define him, Marshall enrolled at Howard University Law School, another historically black institution, which would become the launching pad for his legendary legal career. At Howard, Marshall encountered Charles Hamilton Houston, the vice dean of the law school, and a towering figure in the fight for civil rights. Houston was more than a mentor to Marshall. He was a transformative influence. Known as the man who killed Jim Crow, Houston was a visionary who believed that the law could be wielded as a weapon to dismantle segregation. He trained his students to see themselves as social engineers, tasked with reshaping society. Under Houston's rigorous guidance, Marshall's perspective on the law deepened. He began to understand the systemic nature of racial injustice and how legal precedents could be strategically used to challenge discriminatory practices. This mentorship laid the foundation for Marshall's later victories, including his work on Brown v. Board of Education. Marshall's time at Lincoln and Howard forged not only his legal acumen, but also his resilience and sense of purpose. From his early struggles with academics to his rejection by the University of Maryland, each challenge reinforced his determination to confront injustice. His education, both formal and experiential, became the bedrock of his career as one of the most influential legal minds in American history. The Murray v. Pearson case in 1935 was one of Thurgood Marshall's earliest and most significant legal victories, and it marked the beginning of his campaign against segregation. This landmark case challenged the University of Maryland Law School for refusing admission to Donald Gaines Murray, a highly qualified black applicant, solely based on his race. The University of Maryland's actions were a personal affront to Marshall, as it was the very institution that had denied him admission for the same reason years earlier. Donald Murray was an exceptional candidate. He had graduated with honors from Amherst College and was fully qualified to attend law school. However, Maryland's state law at the time allowed public universities to exclude African Americans while ostensibly providing separate but equal facilities elsewhere. The state justified its discrimination by claiming that black students could attend out-of-state institutions under special tuition arrangements or attend Maryland's underfunded black institutions, none of which had a law school at the time. Marshall, working alongside his mentor, Charles Hamilton Houston, recognized the broader implications of this case. By taking on Murray's case, Marshall and Houston aimed not just to gain justice for one individual, but to strike a blow against the legal doctrine of separate but equal, established by the infamous Plessy v. Ferguson decision in 1896. They argued that the state's refusal to admit Murray to its law school violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment because no comparable legal education was available to black students within the state. The legal strategy employed by Marshall and Houston was meticulous. They emphasized that segregation inherently created inequality, as it deprived black students of access to the same quality of education and resources as their white counterparts. The trial court ultimately agreed, and the decision was upheld by Maryland's highest court. The ruling forced the University of Maryland to admit Murray, making it one of the earliest successful challenges to segregation in higher education. The impact of Murray v. Pearson extended far beyond Donald Murray's admission to law school. This case demonstrated the power of using the Constitution to challenge racial discrimination in the courts and set a precedent for future legal battles against segregation. It also solidified Marshall's reputation as a brilliant and relentless advocate for civil rights. For Marshall, this case was deeply personal and symbolic, a moment of poetic justice that underscored his commitment to dismantling systemic racism, one institution at a time. This victory laid the groundwork for Marshall's more famous cases, including Brown v. Board of Education, where he would take the fight against separate but equal to the national stage. Murray v. Pearson showed that segregation could be defeated through strategic legal action, and it became a cornerstone of the broader civil rights movement. Thurgood Marshall's work with the NAACP was not only intellectually demanding, but also physically dangerous. Beginning in 1936, he served as a staff attorney for the NAACP, later becoming the organization's chief legal counsel. During this time, he traveled extensively through the South to represent African Americans in legal battles against segregation, voter suppression, and racial violence. His work put him on the front lines of the civil rights struggle, often bringing him face to face with the deep hostility of white supremacy. The South in the 1930s and 1940s was a perilous place for anyone challenging the racial status quo. The justice system was overwhelmingly biased against Black Americans, and efforts to challenge this system were met with fierce resistance. Marshall's travels often took him to towns and regions where the Klan and other white supremacist groups operated openly. It was not uncommon for his presence to incite threats, harassment, or outright violence. In one instance, Marshall narrowly avoided being lynched by a mob after successfully defending a black man accused of rape, a case where the defendant had been falsely accused and the trial marred by racial prejudice. Travel itself was fraught with danger. Segregation laws meant Marshall could not stay in white-owned hotels, forcing him to rely on the limited number of black-owned establishments or the hospitality of local families. Even then, his movements were closely watched, and the threat of being ambushed or arrested under false pretenses loomed large. Despite these challenges, Marshall's resolve never wavered. He was acutely aware that his work was not just about winning individual cases, but about challenging the very foundations of systemic racism. Marshall's courage was matched by his sense of humor, which became one of his coping mechanisms during these tense situations. Colleagues often noted his ability to lighten the mood with jokes, even in the most dire circumstances. His sharp wit not only endeared him to those he worked with, but also served as a psychological shield against the relentless pressure he faced. Through it all, Marshall understood the stakes of his work. He was fighting not only for the individuals he represented, but also for the millions of African Americans who lived under the yoke of segregation and discrimination. Each victory, no matter how small, was a step toward dismantling a system that had oppressed Black Americans for generations. His unyielding commitment to justice, even in the face of danger, became a hallmark of his career and cemented his legacy as one of the most courageous figures of the civil rights movement. The 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka was not just Thurgood Marshall's greatest legal triumph, but also a watershed moment in American history. This case challenged the deeply entrenched doctrine of separate but equal, established by the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson decision, which had legalized segregation in public facilities, including schools. Marshall, serving as the lead attorney for the NAACP, argued that segregation in public education violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and his victory fundamentally altered the trajectory of the civil rights movement. By the mid-20th century, public schools in the United States were starkly divided along racial lines, particularly in the South. Schools for Black children were woefully underfunded, overcrowded, and often located in poorly maintained facilities. Teachers were paid less, and resources such as textbooks and supplies were outdated or insufficient. These inequities made it impossible for segregated schools to truly be equal, despite the legal framework supporting segregation. The case itself was actually a consolidation of 5 lawsuits from different states where Black parents, backed by the NAACP, had challenged segregation in their local schools. The lead case, Brown v. Board of Education, originated in Topeka, Kansas, where a young Black girl named Linda Brown was forced to walk a dangerous distance to a segregated school despite a whites-only school being much closer to her home. Marshall's legal team meticulously built their case, combining compelling personal stories of the plaintiffs with hard evidence about the negative impact of segregation on Black children. A key piece of evidence came from psychological studies, such as the famous doll test conducted by Drs. Kenneth and Mamie Clark, which showed that segregation harmed Black children's self-esteem and reinforced feelings of inferiority. Marshall argued that segregation was not only unequal in terms of resources, but also inflicted deep psychological damage, violating the constitutional guarantee of equal protection under the law. Before the Supreme Court, Marshall's eloquence and precision as an advocate shone through. He argued that segregation was inherently discriminatory and could never be made equal in any meaningful way. His arguments resonated with the justices, particularly Chief Justice Earl Warren, who was committed to achieving a unanimous decision. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court delivered its unanimous ruling in favor of the plaintiffs, declaring that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. The decision overturned Plessy v. Ferguson and struck down legalized segregation in public schools, sending a powerful message that racial discrimination had no place in American law. However, the court's ruling did not include a specific timeline for desegregation, leading to a protracted struggle to implement the decision. The Brown v. Board of Education decision galvanized the civil rights movement, providing both a legal precedent and moral justification for challenging segregation in other areas of American life. It inspired grassroots activism, including boycotts, sit-ins, and marches, and encouraged African Americans to push for broader changes in housing, employment, and voting rights. While desegregation was met with fierce resistance, most notably in events like the Little Rock 9 crisis, it marked the beginning of the end for Jim Crow laws. For Thurgood Marshall, this victory was both a culmination of years of tireless work and a stepping stone toward further battles for equality. He viewed Brown v. Board of Education as a key moment in dismantling institutional racism, but understood that the fight for true equality would require sustained effort. This case solidified his legacy as a visionary lawyer and leader who fundamentally reshaped America's legal and social landscape. Thurgood Marshall's appointment to the Supreme Court on October 2, 1967, was a historic moment, as he became the first African-American justice to serve on the nation's highest court. Nominated by President Lyndon B. Johnson, Marshall's elevation to the bench was both a recognition of his extraordinary legal career and a powerful symbol of progress during the civil rights era. His appointment broke a barrier that had stood since the court's founding and underscored the changing tides of American society. Marshall's presence on the Supreme Court was profoundly significant in a nation still grappling with the legacy of slavery, segregation, and systemic racism. As a Black man who had lived through and fought against institutional discrimination, he brought a unique perspective to the court. His very appointment sent a message that the federal government was committed to greater inclusion and representation in its most powerful institutions. For millions of African Americans, Marshall's ascent was a source of pride and hope, representing the possibility of justice at the highest levels. On the court, Justice Marshall remained a steadfast advocate for the principles he had championed throughout his legal career: equality, civil rights, and justice for the underserved. He was a member of the court's liberal bloc and consistently voted in favor of expanding civil rights, protecting individual freedoms, and ensuring equal access to justice. Marshall was deeply committed to the idea that the Constitution should be interpreted as a living document that responds to the evolving needs of society. Marshall's opinions often emphasized the protection of the most vulnerable. He played a crucial role in cases involving issues such as affirmative action, the rights of criminal defendants, and the protection of First Amendment freedoms. He was a strong advocate for voting rights, arguing that the right to vote was foundational to democracy and must be protected against any form of disenfranchisement. While Marshall's influence was significant, he often found himself in the minority as the court became more conservative in the later years of his tenure. Nevertheless, his dissents were powerful and prescient, often warning of the consequences of decisions that, in his view, rolled back civil rights or failed to protect marginalized communities. One of his most famous dissents was in San Antonio Independent School District v. Rodriguez, 1973, where the court upheld unequal funding for public schools. Marshall argued passionately that education was a fundamental right and that inequitable funding perpetuated systemic inequality. His dissents were not just legal arguments, they were moral appeals, written in clear and compelling language designed to highlight the human impact of the court's decisions. These writings continue to resonate today, often cited by legal scholars and advocates as blueprints for a more just society. Marshall retired from the court in 1991, leaving behind a legacy as one of its most principled and influential justices. His impact extended far beyond the decisions he participated in. His presence on the court itself was a constant reminder of the ongoing struggle for equality. Marshall's legal philosophy, shaped by his experiences as a civil rights lawyer, ensured that the voices of the marginalized were heard in the nation's most powerful legal forum. Even after his death in 1993, Marshall's contributions continue to inspire generations of lawyers, activists, and citizens committed to justice. His life story serves as a powerful example of how perseverance, courage, and the pursuit of equality can reshape a nation. Through his rulings, dissents, and the path he paved, Thurgood Marshall remains an enduring symbol of progress and an unwavering voice for justice. Thurgood Marshall's story is one of courage, intellect, and perseverance. As we reflect on his life, we must ask ourselves, how can we continue the fight for justice in our own time? One way to honor Thurgood Marshall's legacy is by supporting the ongoing work of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, LDF. Founded in 1940 under the leadership of none other than Thurgood Marshall himself, LDF has been at the forefront of the fight for racial justice and equality for over 8 decades. As the nation's first civil rights law organization, LDF has played a pivotal role in landmark cases that have shaped American society, from the historic Brown v. Board of Education to more recent battles against voter suppression, economic inequality, and police brutality. Today, LDF continues to carry Marshall's vision forward by using litigation, advocacy, and public education to combat systemic racism and expand opportunity for marginalized communities. Their work includes advancing equity in education, protecting the right to vote, and fighting for criminal justice reform. By tackling these critical issues, LDF not only defends the gains achieved during Marshall's lifetime, but also paves the way for future generations to live in a more just and inclusive society. If you're inspired by Thurgood Marshall's life and the mission of the LDF, consider supporting their work. Check out the video description below for more details on how you can contribute to this vital organization and join the ongoing fight for justice and equality. Every action, no matter how small, brings us one step closer to realizing the vision of a fair and equitable world. Check the description for resources to learn more about Thurgood Marshall and the cases that defined his career. Thank you for joining us to celebrate this incredible legacy. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of impact. Next time, we'll explore the life of Langston Hughes, one of the most influential voices of the Harlem Renaissance. See you then.